Hi, my name is Susan Armstrong, and I'm a technical writer located in Montreal. In the next 30 minutes, we'll look at some technical manuals spanning the past 80 years. We'll see how we gradually move from pouring information into our users' heads to using the way they work and think to guide them in self-directed learning. The early training materials and manuals that we'll look at were hardware manuals for airplanes and automobiles that were created and published using what are now antiquated systems, such as typewriters and offset printing. But they were sometimes written by people who had a surprising intuition of what to provide and how. The later materials were prepared with sophisticated digital software and a growing knowledge of how adults learn. Templates help your clients understand your product by presenting a sound view of a sound manual that was built topic by topic with consistent structure and language. Templates provide standard formatting and layouts for headings, paragraphs, cross-reference formats, tables, and examples, so that the chapters, sections, and pages of our documents can be written by multiple people over multiple iterations. Templates make it easier for us to write our documentation. They add a common look and feel to your topics so that users can understand their structure before even reading them. They keep the learning experience on an even trajectory with no puzzles, surprises, or contradictions, and they make it easier for users to scan and quickly find information. This is the first page of the table of contents for a 1939 aircraft engine maintenance manual published by the Pittman Publishing Corporation. It displays the limitations of low production specialized documents of the time. Titles and text are in the same font, the only font used, Times Roman. Section titles are scrunched into paragraphs, although I've seen this before in other manuals of this period, and it could be common, was perhaps common. The introduction explains that the book is divided into chapters, sections, subsections, and topics, and outlines the titles for them. Chapter titles are all caps and larger than text, about 20 point, I'm guessing. Section titles are all caps and underlined. Subsections, they call them topics, are in title case and underlined. By the use of the system of subdivisions, they say, the material is separated into small, coherent units which make for simplified study and quick and easy reference. Maybe not. The book is organized into three parts, which are not always clearly defined. The first part contains engine background information. 5 chapters provide an overview of the basic principles of combustion, the internal combustion engine, the construction of various engines, the tools used on them, and the general maintenance. The second part contains information on the engine systems, carburetors, induction, fuel, electricity, ignition starters, instruments, and propellers. The third part contains maintenance, periodic checks, power plant, installation, overhauling, troubleshooting, and fuels. But no matter what section you're in, there's a mixture of reference, procedures, and hidden tasks, which indicates a lack of definition and anything other than the most basic template. It's somewhat reminiscent of the Nuremberg funnel approach to teaching and learning. Drill a hole in the student's head, put a funnel in, and let the teacher shout into it. Or like the product manuals for the early home computers, the Commodore 64 and the Atari 2600. I remember one engineer telling me he had to read the Atari manual 2 or 3 times before he understood it because critical information was spread all over the manual. The titles here use the present participle or gerund, the verb plus ing, starting, stopping, adding, changing. This is a weak command, and the constant ing-ing across a how-to section becomes not just tiring, but irritating. whereas the imperative form, start, stop, add, change, can enhance the action, or you can also mix and match them. But oh wait, this isn't a procedure. Well, maybe it is. It seems to have reference information mixed in with tasks and multiple dangerous situations with only one caution underlined but buried in the text. This page in Chapter 5, Servicing and Operating, appears to have a procedure beginning at the bottom of the page, but many of its steps contain multiple actions which may just be multiple steps, or they may be sub-steps, in which case they're subtasks. Multiple actions in a single step hide information. In the end, though, I love this book. It describes 5 or 6 old engines and has great tool descriptions. And it describes the really crazy ways they had of starting those old planes. The authors were airplane pilots, mechanics, and instructors who decided to write a basic text for new learners. Daniel J. Brim was a licensed pilot, licensed airplane and engine mechanic, and an instructor in airplane engines at the New York City Aviation Trades. He was also a former test pilot, former manager at Marine Flying Services, and former chief engineer at Ireland Aircraft, Inc. H. Edward Bodges was a licensed pilot, licensed airplane and engine mechanic, and an instructor in airplane mechanics at the New York City Aviation Trades. He was also a former ground school instructor, former flight mechanic at Curtiss Flying Service, and former co-pilot for the Roosevelt Flying Corporation. You got to admire these guys. They just kept on reinventing themselves. Here we have the 1946 Oldsmobile Hydromatic Drive Sequence Manual from General Motors. It's a well-prepared manufacturer's handbook of about 100 pages, plus 2 parts lists. Its procedures covered the removal, disassembly, reassembly, inspection, installation, maintenance, and minor servicing of the 185O Hydromatic Drive transmission. A transmission uses a mechanical system of gears and gear trains to transmit the energy released in the engine to the wheels. It's the earliest instance of task-based documentation that I have. It was obviously written by engineers and mechanics and directed at experienced automotive mechanics. The table of contents here shows the anonymous author's clear path from disassembly to final testing. Every procedure in this manual starts at the top of the page. They were written by writers who clearly understood that they would be used by people who would not read all of them from the beginning to end, but would jump in and out as needed. The procedure's title is all caps, and in case that doesn't stand out enough, it is underlined, overlined, and with a grayed background. This procedure has 2 subtasks. A. Remove the part covering the transmission. B. Remove the transmission. It provides clear instructions, mostly with 1 action per step. It also has simple numbered photographs with callout, which allows the writer to refer to them by name. Note how the black background in the photos removes background clutter, unlike what's behind me. There is a caution on this page that appears at the top of the page, but seems to really refer to the last step on the previous page. The previous step should have been brought forward onto this page. Another drawback here is that the 1 action, 1 step rule breaks down several times, such as in step 8 in the first task, and then in steps 3, 4, and 5 in the second. Otherwise, this is a well thought out procedure written by someone with a clear knowledge of what their users needed. This 1953 manufacturer's handbook, the Autotronic Eye Repair Manual, has only 8 pages of instructions. It was written to provide GM servicemen with the correct service adjustments and repair procedures for the Autotronic Eye, and an accessory for 1953 GM passenger cars This was an electronic device that selected the strength of the beam of the car's headlights in response to the light from an approaching car. It has a short reference section. Then the main body of the document contains the procedures to install, test, and adjust the eye, perform maintenance and troubleshooting, and use the test tool, not necessarily in that order. Except for its lack of headers, it shows advancements in layout with acknowledgement of subtasks and use of notes and warnings, but it also has drawbacks. The procedure sensitivity adjustments, the largest procedure in the manual, starts at the bottom of the previous page, with a requirement to test the batteries of the tester, and the procedure to do so are embedded in the introduction. It also has multiple multi-action steps. See step 9, for example. Note that it is the author's responsibility to identify all tasks, large and small. If they're not identified, you can't find them when you need them. Finding information was just as important then as now. Then, if the talk or the index came up short, they were locked into scanning through every page of the manual by hand to find anything. Today, although we can do searches, scanning is just as important because we're still faced with scanning through all the pages that the search returns. On this page, the writer differentiates between tasks, subtasks, and subtasks. But step 13 is still a multi-action step. It should be a step called recheck the setting. They use good simple photographs. This time, a white background removes any background clutter. Skip forward to the 1980s, a decade of technological change, when personal computers and the software that ran on them were introduced into offices and schools. Kids generally took it in their stride, but their parents didn't. They were faced at work with something they knew very little about that they were being forced to use, and they were having a lot of problems. In response to this, a group of cognitive psychologists, CPs, studying human computer interaction, either directly or indirectly in the industrial labs like IBM's research division, started studying the difficulties that adult learners experienced when using self instruction material. The CPs discovered that the adult learners were laboring under a conundrum. They needed to do their jobs, but doing their jobs involves using these new tools. They wanted the instructions they needed for individual tasks on an immediate basis, which for even slightly complex tools was next to impossible. So they tended to jump around learning sequences in the instruction materials, searching for answers to immediate questions. And because the material was so new, they needed also to construct their own understanding of it. But because the material was so new, they often overgeneralized, formed incorrect conclusions, and became easily confused. From this, the CPs developed the theory of minimalism. In technical documentation, minimalism effectively boils down to provide less information and let people learn by working on guided real-life problems. That is, provide them with a little bit of theory, but give them real-life tasks to work with while learning. This is the first page of the table of contents for Paradox's 1992 Getting Started Guide from Borland International. Paradox Paradox was a full-featured relational database package for Windows 32, with a user interface for people with no programming experience, that is, real office workers. The manual attempted to fulfill most of the cognitive psychologist's suggestions. It not only has a table of contents, but the talk is followed by a list of examples, a list of tables, and a list of figures. Chapter 1 describes common Windows concepts. It explains simple mouse terms, keyboard terms, and print conventions. The rest of the manual is divided into two parts. Part 1 chapters 2 to 13, is an overview of Paradox provided through simple use cases supported by sample files in a sample installation directory. And part 2, chapters 14 to 16, are technical topics for system administrators, et al. This is followed by an index. The first chapter of Part 2, Exploring Paradox, is an overview of Paradox as a Windows application. It defines database terms, describes how to use the Paradox desktop window, how to use directories, and how to use online help. The rest of the tutorials are organized by feature, working with tables, creating new tables, using forms and reports, designing new forms, designing new reports, designing mailing labels, querying data, changing tables, and managing files. They have introductory reference material in them, followed by examples of how to use each function in the feature. Examples that are supported by sample files in an example directory in the installation directory. They're well written, well formatted, and everything follows the same template. The following page is a page from Chapter 5, Working with Tables. It provides numerous tutorials, each of which is broken into several tasks. This tutorial, Selecting Records and Fields, has one general description of how to view the customer's table using the record menu, and 3 more tasks spread over as many pages on how to view the table's records, with the mouse, with the keyboard, and using the speed bar. It's more basic than it would be today, but that was needed then. It also makes use of other practices that were the result of research into learning, such as using white space to display menus, icons, and labels, or for writing notes, or not. As this document came out, however, society was being hit by yet another technological change, the introduction of the World Wide Web. This is a telecom documentation set from Nortel dating from the year 2000. It consisted of 13 manuals and 3 appendices, delivered in both paper and PDF form. Each manual had a page like this that displayed a view of the whole set in what they called a roadmap. Strangely, the index had links, PDF only, to pages in the complete set, but these roadmaps didn't even link to the front page of the documents. Most of the reference information was in the Planning 100 series manuals. Physical installation procedures were in the Installation 200 series manuals, and the manual configuration procedures were in the Commissioning 300 series manuals. Note that the current manual in maintaining and trouble clearing, the 500 series, is highlighted. I put in the red circle. It contains the procedure that we'll look at next. Each manual had a table of contents, a talk, on the front cover, which linked PDFs only to its chapters. Each PDF also had an interactive talk that was permanently displayed in the left side panel, which made every procedure in the manual immediately available to the user. The whole set was created and generated using FrameMaker, which was a pretty powerful tool at the time. This was a highly formatted paper PDF set of documents with hyperlinks that could reach out of the page to other documents in the set and beyond. Here is a procedure in the trouble clearing manual. It starts on its own page and has 2 subtasks. The interactive talk links PDF only to workflows for this procedure. The interactive list below it links PDF only to required information that the user should have on hand or read before performing this procedure. Note how these template elements are used to point into the procedure or into other parts of the documentation. This is the beginning of the connectivity changes that brought technical writing online. In a few years, there would be few PDFs and no paper. Today, templates are generally not as highly formatted as this. They weren't really that highly formatted then. It varied from company to company based on the products and customers, and they were dictated by the limitations of the software that was used to produce it. A manual created with either Madcap Flair, Help Manual, or FrameMaker is going to have a lot more bells and whistles than something produced by Confluence, MakeDocs, or Sphinx. But the underlying principles, the minutiae, the micro rules of a tutorial template remain the same for them all. Just one more interesting construct from the set. This page uses tables to list warnings with possible causes and resolutions, kind of like mini tasks in a box. I use this setup to accommodate problems and whatnot. So this is my generic tutorial procedure topic template that I've created and use more or less, sometimes more, sometimes less. In the preceding slides, we saw how the format and styles of documentation changed over the years as a result of the tools we use and research by cognitive psychologists into adult learning. This template tries to embody the minimalist mantra that less means more. It's written in Word, and I'll place it along with this presentation in Google Docs. But let's look at it now together. First, each tutorial needs a title. For the most part, this should begin with a verb that describes its main function. The title should be followed by at least one sentence that describes what's in the tutorial. If the documentation is for different user roles or experience, you can also indicate the level that applies to this document. Try to provide an introduction after all headings. I know sometimes this is tedious and sometimes it's hard to come up with something, but it does force both the writer and the reader to recognize what each section is for. The requirements section should list anything the user should know or have before starting the procedure. Give the procedure/task a title. It's okay if it's pretty much the same as the tutorial's title. It's just there to begin the procedure, the steps. Now the template slips back and forth between a template and a procedure, advising you how to write a template which defines a process to follow to gather at least a list of your topics together, and from them decide what you need to put into the template. Advises you what to put into your template, and advises the writer how to block out a subtask. The rest of the elements, troubleshooting, a conclusion, and see also, are like the requirements section, all optional. You have to do something to put into them to use them.